signal operations and arterial systems deployment for about 20 years. I guess I know a couple of faces in the room. And I'm going to talk maybe 20 minutes about some of the things that we've been doing recently with our signal system and with some work we've done for Federal Highway on visualizing arterial performance and sort of the big data flavor of that. So, big data is this new and exciting term and a buzzword, and if you're like me, sorry, backwards, your presentation. Not my laptop. Okay, so big data. So if you're confused, maybe like me, about what that means, I don't think you're alone. I pulled this picture off the internet a couple of weeks ago, and here's an explanation of all the pieces and parts of big data. I'm certainly not going to explain all of this to you, and maybe all of you know a whole lot more about what Green Plum and the TESA and BPO and all of those things do. I certainly don't, but to get, the focus of this conference is on visualization. And if you look on this chart, you're not supposed to do visualization until you get to zettabytes, right? And that doesn't really make any sense, because we do visualization with very small data sets, and all of these things here can be done before you get to the sort of big data level of analysis. So let's take a typical freeway system. Let's say it's got some detectors, it's got some video cameras, it's got some incidents and so on. Maybe you got 1,000 detector stations. They collect data about every 30 seconds typically, and that gets stored. That's something like 3 million data points a day, right? That's not a lot of data, 10 bytes per day. 28 megs a day. Wow, we're getting up into big data, aren't we? So in a whole year, you've got 10 gigs of information. Is that considered big data? I don't know. Probably not. So let's take a typical arterial system like KITS. This is our system that we deploy across the country. Let's say we have 1,000 intersections. Okay, now we've got 16 detectors and 8 phases, pedestrians, and some other stuff going on. So you ramp that up to something like 1 billion data points a day. Right? And it's still pretty small bits of information, say a byte, so you're storing maybe a gigabyte a day. That's still a whopping 350 gigs a year. You can fill that up on your hard, you can run it on this laptop. It's just not an overwhelming set of information. So now let's scale up and not just look at the detectors and the phase timing and say, okay, now we're going to store all the comm diagnostics, all the events, all the alerts, travel times from Bluetooth sensors, or AOM sensors, MOEs, and probe runs, and whatnot. Maybe it's double. Okay, so now it's 700 gigs a year. Is that big? We're getting there. We're getting close to being big. So if you look at, say, all of the traffic signals in the United States, we're logging all that information for all of them. Now we're at 225 terabytes a year. Because now we're starting to get into numbers that mean something, right? Is that big? So in comparison, your friends over at Twitter, right? They have something like 400 million tweets a day, and they're all pretty small, right? 140 characters. If you neglect the fact that a lot of people attach pictures and whatnot, they're storing 22.5 terabytes a year. So 10 times as much data is stored by arterial systems in a year than what's done in Twitter. And Twitter is kind of this, I don't know, paragon of what big data is all about. And there's all these new tools and things to investigate what's going on in Twitter. So who knows who's the #1 Twitter person that's followed on Twitter?
Stephen Fry.
Who?
Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry.
Lady
Carl.
Gaga.
Anybody else? How about the Pope? No? Okay, so the answer is, as of yesterday, Justin Bieber. 46 million people, probably all about tween-age girls, right? Following Justin Bieber. He has tweeted 24,000 times, right? He's been on Twitter for 5 years, right? So that's roughly 24 tweets a day. So every 30 minutes, you're getting a tweet from Justin Bieber. And that needs to be tracked, right? That needs to be analyzed, and we have to have big data analytics to tell us what Justin is doing on a day-to-day basis. I found this thing a couple of days ago. You know, you can pay 150. I'm sorry, I hope Twitter counter employees aren't here, but you can pay $150 a month to know you have updated stats every hour. Who's tweeting about Justin Bieber? Isn't this is important information that we need to know? Or you can get it free and then you just get basic Twitter stats. So, just an aside about, you know, what is big data and what does it mean and why do we care about tweets and so on? So this is what we did with big data up until about 5 years ago, right? Particularly in arterial systems. Say, oh, we've got this database and SQL Server can only handle so much and the tables can't grow, and so every 30 days, let's throw away everything in the past, right? What do we need to know about the comm statistics from 2 years ago? Maybe some of that's true. I mean, what do you really need to know about comm statistics from 2 years ago? And now the mindset is changing, that because we have it, we might as well keep it. And then we've got to analyze it because we have it, right? So the new strategies, you know, you see all these different things starting up in big data. Again, I don't know what all these companies do or how they fit in, but you've got analytics and you've got infrastructure as a service. One of my favorites is info chimps. That's the infrastructure as a service. Operational infrastructure, adapt, Couchbase, Terracotta, and so on and so on. Maybe Carl knows all those folks in Silicon Valley and knows how they all work and fit together. But yeah, this is a sort of a big mess, if you ask me. What are you going to do with what? Where's the value? And Rob mentioned return on investment. What is all of this worth? So, you know, the software industry is plagued by this problem forever, as long as it's been around. The newest thing on the block is the next silver bullet, and you've got to use my InfoChimp service to improve your ROI and so on. So I'm going to show you some things that don't require Hadoop or any of the other stuff. We're doing this with plain old SQL Server and some queries and some charts and graphs and things. So we'll talk about arterial performance for a minute. Okay, so arterial performance is, since the dawn of time, has been dominated by what? Before and after studies, right? Go out and collect some data of what you did before, then you change the signal timings, or add a left turn lane, or do whatever, and then do it and get some more data, right? And, okay, so let's say you do that, and the performance isn't really that different. You know, the dancing girls, right? That their parents may enjoy their performance, but for most of us, we're not going to pay $50 or $60 to come see the young ladies twiddle around, right? So what that typically means is that the underlying baseline performance was pretty good. And then you change something, and it didn't really change the performance very much. So does that mean your treatment was bad? Your treatment was a waste of money? It was low return on investment? Maybe. Another situation where you get the dancing girls is when the problem isn't that hard. And we see this in a number of places where the mayor gets excited about adaptive control. They say, we have to have adaptive control. And they go and find this arterial and they say, let's put it here. And there's not that much traffic there. And so they say, well, the adaptive system didn't really do that well. That means that system isn't any good. Well, maybe it just means that you didn't apply it to a very hard problem. And then the last thing is that sometimes the problem is really hard. And you try to get a treatment for a situation where you just got traffic and traffic and traffic, and anything you try looks about the same. And that's where we're kind of at now, is struggling with how do you distinguish between, how do you get at what I call a zero-based measure for performance, instead of doing this kind of before and after stuff, which tends to, this laptop is different than mine. Okay, so we're trying to get at how we can measure performance without having to do before and after studies, which tends to exacerbate the differences between situations. So now let's say in the other case, you deploy this new adaptive system, or you deploy this new treatment, and Jimi Hendrix is playing the guitar, and this is fantastic. And you get 90% reduction in delays, and 1,000% reduction in stops. And some vendors are going around saying that their system's better because it reduced delays by 1,000,000%. Well, that typically means that the before condition was pretty bad. So you put anything good on top of bad, and you get really good performance. So what do you know? It's apples and oranges. Hopefully, in an adaptive context, the sort of sweet spot for when adaptive is most effective is when traffic is changing, not when it's static, not at the AM peak period, not at the PM peak period. It's when you have incidents and things, and that's very, very rarely evaluated. And then maybe if you get good performance, you might be cherry picking the results. I know nobody in this room's ever done that. I certainly haven't either. So in the last couple of years, and you heard the keynote speaker talk about the Everyday Counts program. So as part of that program, we've been working with FHWA to develop some tools for measuring performance on arterials and getting data from lots of different data sources. So from traditional system detection, from probe data on your phone, from Bluetooth sensors or AWAM sensors, you're not allowed to say Bluetooth anymore, and also from the signal itself. And it does some processing calculations, and we roll those up into MOEs, and you can do before and after studies and stuff like that. So this is what we call, for the last 25 years, a split monitor. So this is showing you the y-axis here is the length of the cycle at an intersection, and the x-axis is time of day. So each of these bars, if you know about traffic controllers, they have two rings. The way they work, they have phases and rings, and the top graph is showing you the phases in ring 1, the bottom graph is showing you the phases in ring 2. And signal engineers look at this stuff to determine when there's problems. So someone will call on the phone, or you'll call on the phone and say, I waited for 10 minutes, I never got service, this signal's broken. And so they'll go back in their history using a tool like this and say, oh, well, yeah, that left turn only came on once in the last 20 minutes, so maybe there's a problem with the detector, and then they'll dispatch some technicians to go and fix it. So that's one intersection, right? So we store that now. We used to say, like I said before, 30 days of data, we got to throw it all away. It's filling up the database. Well, now we store that for years. We have a repository of that kind of information, second by second data about if the signal's red, yellow, or green for like 3 years now. That's all our systems. So you take that from one intersection and roll it up to many intersections, and now you have a picture like this, which is a real-time time-space diagram. So what does that show? That shows these big green bands. Those of you who are familiar with Synchro, it's a tool that a lot of people use to time signals and determine the relationships between one signal and another. So that big green bar is saying that if you start from the corner of the arterial and drive this way, you're not going to stop. Start from this corner and drive that way, you're not going to stop. But this is a prediction. Okay, this is a guesstimate of what's really possible, but not what's actually happening, because we don't have detector information or probes to know if anybody's actually using those green bands. And then you don't know where the queues are, so sometimes you can't get through because there are people waiting on the cycle before. So we're storing this all the time. And you can go back in history and look at the performance of things. And here's an example of where this signal sort of in the middle had a preemption event. So an emergency vehicle goes through, turns the light red, and then all of a sudden you see the green band go away. So you had good travel, and then the preempt comes, and then it goes away, and then it comes back. So that's the kind of analysis you can do with just the phase timing data at an intersection. Okay, so now let's combine detector information from those loops or video detectors or zones in the street with your phase timing data. So now you can get a picture like this that tells you whether the progression on a particular approach to an intersection is good or bad. So the time of day is on the x-axis and the cycle time is on the y-axis. So all it's showing now is which phase is the coordinated phase, which phase you're trying to progress traffic for. So the simple way to look at this is the more black dots on the top, the better your progression is. So that's good. You get a picture like this where most people are arriving when the light is red, that's bad. So good, bad. So that's, again, one intersection. So we started with one intersection, then we look at an arterial, and we look at the detector data. Okay, so you can look at those pictures and see what's going on at one location, but you don't really know what's going on an arterial. So back to our old buddy, the bar chart, it shows you the percentage of arrivals on green for all of the signals on an arterial. So that's kind of you can kind of look at that and say that there's pretty good progression on an arterial. But now we're starting to draw pictures like this, which show you when in the cycle the light is green, and the gray part shows you when the traffic is arriving. So basically the more that green that covers the gray, the better off you are in terms of progression in both the directions. And so if you're a statistics guy or gal and want to look at flow profiles, we're starting to do that too, where you can show whether the statistical look at how the traffic arrives is progressing or not, and do some statistical tests and say whether that's whether you're doing a good job or not. So that's all information you can get from your existing traffic controller and your existing detection without any additional equipment or whatnot, just from the information that it's collecting all the time. So let's talk about travel time performance. So we have, as part of this Everyday Counts program, project that we did for them, we developed this smartphone app for Android and iPhone that you can start at the beginning of a travel time run and then stop when you're done. So this is my commute from home to work in Phoenix, and you can see that I don't speed along the way. I'm always going below the speed limit, and that's a joke. But so you can see the performance of my particular trip. And of course, I do this most every day when I'm home, so you can get lots of statistics about how that arterial or how that trip performs over time. So we've started making movies like this that show you the comparison of before and after. Again, we have to this just seems, we can't get away from this before and after, at least right now. We're working on that. And so you can make movies like this where you're coordinating the real-time travel runs from the smartphone with a video that the smartphone's taking as you're driving along, and then syncing that up into this little graphic that tells you whether your before and after performance is better or worse. And this is a good visualization tool for the public and for people that don't understand all those graphs and statistical distributions and whatnot. So go back to our real-time time-space diagram. So now we can take those travel time runs and put them on top of our real-time time-space. So now you see the little blue car with the white dots is showing you how a particular trip was actually realized along the arterial that you're driving. I'll finish, I guess, with this one that shows maybe leading into some of what Mark's going to talk about in terms of transit priority. So this is a project that we're doing in Austin to provide transit priority through a center-to-center connection. So you know what that means? It means that the transit management system sends a software message to our arterial management system that says, I need transit priority. So there's no additional equipment on the bus, there's no additional equipment in the field, there's nothing else to maintain other than this center-to-center connection. So now we're showing when the vehicle is asking for priority, when it's checking in at the intersection, and whether it gets green extension or not. So this is helping our client, Cap Metro, the transit agency in Austin, understand that their TSP that they paid X dollars for is actually working. Maybe that's some of what Mark's going to explain as well. So, in conclusion, this is maybe a little overused metaphor, but we're really just scratching the surface of this iceberg that's called big data. We've got a whole bunch of stuff under there that's still of interest to a lot of agencies. Particularly, you've probably heard of the Sharp 2 program, and one of those pieces of it is reliability. And there's a lot of emphasis on how do you estimate reliability of travel and not just the average. Aggregation is still, I think, an open question, particularly for arterial systems. How do you report the performance of a city? How do you report the performance of a network? Is it millions of miles traveled, you know, I don't know, that's more like from my opinion is, you know, the HCM says you get level of service D. Okay, well, that's mostly driven by just the level of traffic that you have, not what you're actually doing or not doing. So we need aggregation measures that mean something about how effective you're being in management, not just how many people are out there driving around. And dashboards, we all wanna talk about dashboards. What do dashboards really need to have on them, you know? Since before the advent of MAP 21, arterial agencies had no objectives to meet. There's nothing that they have to do other than do a good job at providing safe, efficient travel and whatnot. But there are no metrics that they're supposed to meet. So that's a big thing. I think that's emerging in the arterial world. And that'll conclude and take questions.
Yep, so if we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
You know, it's more a great presentation, by the way. More a comment than a question. As you mentioned, in terms of performance metrics for measuring what constitutes an acceptable performance on an arterial. One of the things, you know, working on similar projects for fertilizer administration, we are starting to talk, and there's a general acceptance that it is going to be potentially a bunch of performance measures. So what's slowly starting to emerge is something like a utility index that would maximize what a particular region wants, which could include like travel time, include flows, include you know, economic vitality, and many other even surrogate measures. And a certain region might be more emphatic on emissions versus somebody else who's more looking at economic productivity, and that's where the future is going, unlike what the HCM, so to speak, has, like one LOS measure for the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. The challenge is that if you have level of service D, there's still, or let's say F. Level of service F is the most challenging traffic situation you have, but believe me, there's different ways to handle that.
Right.
You can be smart about clearing queues faster than somebody else, right? And so that's the kind of things that just are not captured at all. Like how long does it take to dissipate the peak hour? You know, if you're doing dumb things, you make that peak hour last to hours, plural, right? But if you can do some smart things on the back end of the peak period, you can actually help reduce some of the lingering